Yo, what up? It's Elena Bennett, and we are headed into a new series with our new month of May, and I'm super pumped. We're going to get started with the story from when I was 17, and I was headed to Nicolay Bible Institute with my mom to check out if I wanted to go to that school. Nicolay was at Silver Birch Ranch, which was in the middle of nowhere, beautiful Wisconsin. And I'm there hanging out with the college kids, and I get invited to go to the bonfire they were having that night, which I was like, cool, but like, I don't know you guys, and I don't even know where that is. And I told myself, I don't have to go unless one of those college kids came to me and said, hey, Elena, you can come with me to the bonfire. And who was going to do that? A kind person was going to do that. So lo and behold, I'm in my cabin, in my sleeping bag, and knock, knock. But on the other side of the door was this girl named Taylor, and she was wondering if I'd want to go with her to the bonfire because she thought maybe I didn't know where it was, and it might be a little bit more comfortable to go with somebody else. You got friends like that? Friends that are kind, that when they're in the group, everybody's just better because of it? When I was in high school, there was this girl named Jeanette that went to the youth group with me, and she was hilarious. Like, I wanted to be with her because you know what happens when everybody's laughing? They're all on level playing field. Like, nobody's cooler than the other person. And Jeanette had that way of making everybody laugh, not at somebody, but with them. And so when I was with her, I felt seen and known. I love when those kind of people are in the group. A lot of times, though, they don't even recognize that they have that effect. And the opposite is true. When you got people that don't know how to smile, or there's like something wrong and it's kind of like walking on thin ice, they bring down the happiness in the group a lot. And they don't recognize that they have that kind of influence. But they do. And so do you. But you have the choice to have it be something that makes the group better or worse. And you might be like, Elena, this is crazy talk. We're in shelter in place and like I'm home all day and my dog doesn't even listen to me. And maybe you feel like that's your reality, but that's why we need to talk about the truth of what God has given you to do. So we're going to go to God's Word. I know, shocking, but the fact about God's Word is that when we read it, we get the opportunity to be changed because of it. And I don't want to stay the same, and I'm sure you don't want to either. So we're going to read from the book of John, which was a letter that John wrote, who was a follower of Jesus. He was one of the guys that was pretty tight with Jesus. In fact, when Jesus was on the cross, he gave John the responsibility to take care of his mom. So John was kind of like family. And John records a story where a lot of people started to follow Jesus. You see, word was getting out that Jesus was healing people and doing miracles, and they wanted in on this gig. Now, we also know that a lot of people hated Jesus, hence why they wanted to kill him, but that's moving on. And in this part of the story, Jesus was literally just hanging out with the disciples, and 20,000 people showed up. The record says 5,000 men, and that's because in those times they didn't count for women and children. So it was probably more like 15 to 20,000 people. Now, this story gets spicy because it's getting around mealtime and nobody has food. Or at least I don't think anybody does. And so when Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming towards him, he said to Philip, where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. And this was Philip's response. It would take more than a half a year's wage to buy enough bread for each one to have even a bite. Now, I'd like to say I would answer differently, but let's be real. It would be like going to McDonald's and ordering 20,000 Big Macs. So I can see where this sounded a little impossible, but they are talking to the guy that does the impossible. So we got another disciple named Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He spoke up and said, here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many? So Andrew sees, here's something, but it's not much. However, he recognizes that with something, since they're talking to the miracle worker, maybe something amazing could happen. And Jesus takes that and says this, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in the place and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus, but we know 20,000 because they didn't count the women and children. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had had enough to eat, he said to the disciples, gather the pieces that were left over. Let nothing be wasted. So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of five barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is coming into the world." Now, this leads to a bunch of questions, right? Like, how and where did this food appear? Was it like buffet style? Did it just like appear there? Where did these baskets come from? It's amazing. And another great question to ask is, who had influence in this story? Like, obviously Jesus did. Without him, the miracle wouldn't have happened. But ponder this. Andrew, the guy that brought the kid to Jesus, had influence. If he hadn't found this kid and brought him to Jesus, we wouldn't have this story to talk about. And the cool thing about Andrew is the kid with the lunch was not the only guy that he brought to Jesus. He also brought his brother Peter. Peter, who Jesus said would build the church upon him. Like, because of Peter, we have the church. Like, the church that you and I go to. So it's almost like, because of how Andrew used his influence, you and I have heard about the gospel. What? That's crazy awesome. And then we got the little kid, like the superstar kid. Now, in those days, kids were not a big deal. They could have they were not considered valuable. And so it could have been super easy for this kid to be like, well, I got something, but like, is this guy even gonna listen to me? However, Jesus did. Jesus took what this kid brought and used it to feed a gazillion people. And it didn't matter that the kid didn't take center stage. It didn't matter that he wasn't well known or in a position of leadership. It didn't matter that he wasn't a preacher or a speaker or popular or even important enough to mention his name. Jesus took what the kid brought and used it to influence others for his blessing. You guys, when it comes to affecting the world around you, it's about you being willing to show up with what you have. But that's impossible if you don't recognize that you have more of an effect than you think. The kid could have not brought the lunch. And if he would have done that, we wouldn't have the story to talk about years later. And Andrew could have thought, well, I'm like not that big of a deal. And like, I just feel like nobody really listens to me. And he could have not brought the kid or his brother Peter. And history would be changed because of it. So there's an important thing you need to recognize with this, guys. Influence is not about doing more, knowing more people, having more followers, having more likes. Influence is not about that. Influence is about taking the people that God has put in your life, your friends, your siblings, your parents, your classmates, your teachers, even in the virtual world, taking the people that God has put in your life and choosing to be a blessing for them. And you could also choose to like be a negative blessing to them too. So like, if you're not choosing to be a blessing and you're being lukewarm about it, then you're being lame about it. And God has a bigger story in store for you. See, quick example, when I was single, there would be moments where I felt like because I wasn't a mom or a wife, I felt like the influence that God had given me wasn't that important because I was comparing to other people. And in those moments, me and Jesus would have a talk and I would write down how God had put me in a position to influence others. How I was a daughter and a sister and an aunt and a cousin and a granddaughter and a niece and a pastor of teens and a coworker and a neighbor and a friend. And when I would stop and pause and think about the people that God had put in my life, I realized that even though it looked different than what I had wanted in that moment, there were a lot of people that I could be a blessing to bring towards Jesus, which is the goal, whether we're single or we're married. Guys, in the Bible, this is a quick side note, but it's really important for you because when you get older, you need to remember this. In the Bible, it talks like about singleness being a gift and marriage being a gift. Now, in our eyes, we think about a gift like, well, that's for us, me, myself, and I. But when we read about a gift that God had given to us, it's meant to be a blessing to the church. It's meant to be a blessing to the community of people that God had put in our life. It is meant to not be about being selfish. It's not about something you can just do for yourself. No, like the gifts that God gave us are meant to be a blessing to the people around us. So who are those people? And what do they need? Do they need encouragement or time or somebody to listen to? Or do you need to clean the kitchen for your mom? I don't know what it is that the people around you need, but you do. And you have the opportunity to do it, to live on mission, to recognize that whether we're in shelter or place or not, God has given us an opportunity to live our life for a greater cause and to use the influence that God has given us. Guys, I get that when we look into the summer of 2020, there's a lot of things canceled. And we don't really know what it's going to look like. But I got one thing that's kind of a big deal that has not been canceled or rescheduled or postponed. And it's a big deal because it is the one job we have as Christians, and that is discipleship. See, if you want to use your influence to have a positive effect on the people around you, you need somebody that's older than you and wiser than you and smarter than you and loves you and loves God. And they're willing to tell you what you need to hear. They're willing to help you take your next steps towards Jesus. And that somebody is your small group leader. Hopefully you have other adults in your life like that, like your parents, but your small group leader is somebody that wants to be there for you. And so show up this summer for small group, whether it's on Zoom or if we're allowed to meet in person. Like, show up and be the kind of person that's teachable and willing to learn about God's word so that you can use your influence to be a blessing to others. And then recognize that the peers in your small group, those are people that you have the opportunity to live life with, not just answer questions about the message after on Thursday night. Like, you can Marco Polo them, you can make sure to check in on them and hear how they're doing and send them a word of encouragement. And hopefully they'll be that kind of person to you as well. You guys, I don't know exactly what the summer of 2020 looks like, but I know that I want to look back on the summer and see discipleship happen. I want to look back and see how I took what I had and gave it to Jesus so that I could get a front row seat to him working. Because ultimately, God's the one that does the changing. We just get to be a part of the plan when we bring what we have to the one who does the miracles. Guys, I'm in, and I hope you are too. Into a new series, and I go, and she goes, a new series from when I was 17. I was headed where? I don't. Good morning, everybody. This is not morning.